for all the years up to that point will not receive any sort of assistance at all. And Speaker, I just want to again reiterate the point. I was speaking, again, I've raised it here in this House a number of times. A young couple, both of them having graduated from St. FX with education degrees. I was speaking to the husband the other day. As I pointed out, their combined loans together, $1,200 a month is what they are paying and what they have to look forward to paying the next 9 years. Now, Mr. Speaker, I was speaking to the husband just the other day, and he was telling me how pleased he was that he had been able to make his payments in the last year and how hard he was working at making his payments, and indicating that he was happy because his student loan was now in the range of $40,000. Now, Mr. Speaker, $40,000 in loans. So that means for 2 years he's been making payments on that. How much was his overall loan? When he's now saying after 2 years of paying, he's happy that he's now in the $40,000 range for the amount of money he owes. Mr. Speaker, is he in a full-time position? No. Like many new teachers, he's doing some contracts, he's doing some maternity leaves, he's doing some substituting, and yet he's required to pay, with his wife, their combined student loans, $1,200 a month. Mr. Chair, that is $1,200 that should be going into our local economy instead of going to banks. That is the sad reality, but that is one more example, Mr. Speaker, of where this government has absolutely failed to recognize the priorities of Nova Scotians in their fiscal policies that they have enacted here in this province. And Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate, but students will remember what this government has done. And to hear the Premier brag about students that are coming to this province, we are proud of students that come to this province, but one thing we can also say is they are at an advantage over our students, because when they return to their province, they actually have loan remission programs and programs in place by their governments to help them with their high debt loads. And it's extremely unfortunate that we cannot say the same for what our students are receiving from the government here in Nova Scotia. But Mr. Speaker, as I said, I do not intend to go on for much longer and on this, but just simply wanted to point out again that Bill number 36 clearly is a failure to reflect the fiscal priorities of Nova Scotians, and I believe in the election coming, Nova Scotians will have the clear opportunity to pass judgment, and I look forward to when either the Premier or any of the members of Cabinet or a Tory backbench attend spring convocation this year, maybe they can stand up and repeat the Premier's words of what a wonderful job they have done for assisting post-secondary students here, especially those who rely on student loans. And I'd be quite curious to see what kind of reactions they get as a result of that. But Mr. Speaker, I may have the opportunity to say a few more words on this, but with that, I will leave it to the member from Hants West to Hants East to make a few remarks on behalf of their caucus. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the member for his comments, and now would like to recognize a member of the NDP caucus, the member from Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to say, I guess, considering this is the, I guess, the sixth budget that I've gotten to speak about, or sixth Financial Measures Act, and I want to tell the chair and the members opposite, this doesn't get any easier. Over the years, we certainly have raised issue upon issue with the government, and have not been able to achieve any significant movement on the government's part. Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, I want to say that this Financial Measures Act has probably in many ways encapsulated what this Tory government is all about, and in particular, I want to refer to the legislation in this act that actually gives a preference to the casino, because it's obvious that the government would rather cater to the casino than it would those people offering services for the RRSS. And, Mr. Speaker, in my own constituency, I would have liked to have seen the government allocate funds that other constituencies with similar concerns could access, and I don't see that happening at all. I want to say that in rural Nova Scotia, roads are a big problem. And for people in rural Nova Scotia, it's important to them to know that the government actually is listening to them. And one of the things that they'll say most often is that we pay taxes and we don't get any services for those taxes. Well, Mr. Chair, the $155 that's coming out of this Financial Measures Act or out of the government's budget to Nova Scotians, and only to some Nova Scotians, is $68 million. And that's $68 million that certainly I would have liked to have seen spent on roads. I think the Nova Scotia taxpayers would have liked to have seen that spent on roads. And actually, I spoke to someone last evening on the phone, said he was talking to his neighbor, and asked his neighbor what he was going to do with $155 that he was getting from the government. And he said, well, I'm going to give mine as a contribution to a political party. But it wasn't going to be to the Progressive Conservative Party, although he didn't identify which party it was that he was going to give it to. Now, maybe it was another province, the Honourable the Minister for Tourism and Culture is saying, and could be. So, Mr. Speaker, if the government really was interested in doing something that Nova Scotia taxpayers could say, finally, something's going to happen that I can see, they certainly could take $68 million and spend it on roads in Nova Scotia. And what I think something that we've asked for since we came into opposition is for the government to establish a priority list so that people actually knew when something was going to happen with their road. The frustration, I think, of working on behalf of your constituents and being a member in opposition and not a member of government, and maybe being a member of government is more frustrating. But I want to say that if people are quite reasonable, I'm amazed at actually how reasonable Nova Scotians are. If you could tell them that their road will be fixed in a year or 2 years or 3 years, and they could depend on that, they would accept that. They'd be very pleased to know that down the road something is going to happen for them. And under our present system, they go from year to year never knowing. They can make the same complaints year after year and not have something addressed significantly. But if we were to set our priorities based on the worst roads, number one, and those conditions of volume, et cetera, then I think we could come up with a fairly accurate priority list. I think the people who work at the department would welcome that. I think they actually do this for themselves every year. They submit their list of priorities. For my area, the operational supervisors do that. They send it to Windsor, to the area manager. He sends it into Purdy's Wharf, in the hopes that that they'll get the allocation that they need in order to attack these priorities. But if they could do that, if they do that year after year, and I'm assuming that pending disaster, that the government could actually tell its people with a list, here's what's going to be done and here's the date at which it'll happen. That is not outside the realm of possibilities in the year 2003. When we enter the 21st century, we should be able to plan 2 or 3 years or 5 years down the road as to what our priorities are going to be. Now, Mr. Speaker, the other area that this Financial Measures Act seemed to totally miss, I got to say, I'm amazed and continually amazed by this government and its lack of commitment to agriculture, its lack of commitment to rural Nova Scotia. And I want the members of the government side to know, I would like the Premier to know, that we envy them. I mean, if we could somehow gather the support in rural Nova Scotia that the Progressive Conservative Party has, then we would certainly be well on our way to forming a government. But yet, this government, not only has it forgotten rural Nova Scotia. Matter of fact, rural Nova Scotia might be better off if this government forgot it. But it doesn't leave it at that. No, Mr. Chair, it has to abuse rural Nova Scotia. So forgetting it would mean that they least might escape the abuse. But that's not the case. This government has gone out of its way. We saw that a few years ago under the previous minister when it came to the Department of Agriculture. Now we see it with the present minister, either about to sign, or if he hasn't signed already, a new federal-provincial agreement for agriculture, which really doesn't put any money on the table on the part of this government that we can see. Matter of fact, it's really been an insult to the industry in the sense that there's been no input by the stakeholders, or if there has been input, it's been totally ignored. At every jurisdiction across this country, farmers and farm organizations have come out and spoken against this new agreement, and yet the federal government and the provinces seem to be going full bore at signing this, and it's a lack of dollars, Mr. Chair, is the reason. And this is something, if this government was going to pass this budget and this Financial Measures Act, they could have addressed this. And why this government doesn't see investment in agriculture as worth as much or more as $9 million that they would put into Orenda Recip, and they can't see that $9 million into agriculture would actually generate jobs and wealth, certainly more than we got from that aerospace industry in Debert. So I can't fathom the government's thinking in this regard. People in agriculture and forestry are committed to this province. They've been here a long time. They've got the infrastructure in place, but this government does not seem willing to actually say, look, even if we shifted dollars out of economic development and made that available to agriculture, we could generate more jobs and more wealth in rural Nova Scotia than we can by sending some of that to the IT sector or Nova Scotia Business Inc. And this is something the government should rethink. These resource sectors are renewable, sustainable, they're committed, they're here for the long term, and the government will be well advised to actually look at those sectors as wealth-generating sectors and job creation sectors, because this is a notion that they could actually sell to the people of Nova Scotia, and I think they would be amazed at the uptake that they would get on any available dollars that the entrepreneurs in rural Nova Scotia would be willing to make use of. The other area that has me baffled, I guess, and the Minister of Health would recognize how baffled I am, because I went to her with this very issue, and I thought for a minute or two in our discussion that she actually agreed with me. But I've been nowhere since as far as getting a response. But this is around the issue of nursing homes and residential agencies that care for seniors, and the business of moratorium or licensing of these agencies. Now, this would take money on the part of the government, and since the government seems to indicate to me, or the minister indicated to me, that there was no formal moratorium, that actually they were looking at the areas that had reduced placement. In other words, that there was a need, areas that had a need certainly weren't under moratorium. And but yet, I have never been able to get that confirmed, but this is an area that I think the government would be well advised that there are communities that could really use those services. There are facilities that people would like to have licensed, and this would take a commitment on the part of the government in this act to do that. But as of yet, they're not willing to go down that road. So certainly some people seem to be able to garner a benefit from the government in this regard, and others are shut out. And I know certainly in my area is an area we could actually use these services. And and people really would be interested in establishing these facilities. As a matter of fact, one or two have done it on their own, out of their own pocket, and the licensing process would actually help them in a big way. Well, we had heard, I think one of our financial critic, the Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview, raised the issue during a question period of no line item in the budget on doubtful accounts, and which would have actually indicated the loss in dollars by the province on Arenda Recep or whatever other initiatives the government has participated in that actually lost taxpayers' money. And this was done, we think, certainly deliberately to make the books look better than they actually were. And I think the idea of going into election is not lost on this party, and the way the government may try to juggle the books in order to make them look better than they actually are is, we may want to say, maybe fair game in politics, but it may not be fair to Nova Scotia taxpayers. I think they at least are going to be aware by us that the province has lost money on some of these enterprises. I want to say that no truer words were spoken than those by the Premier, I think back in 99 or 2000 when he told us to ferret it out. Trying to get information out of this government has been difficult, and actually even the information we were able to gain by the Freedom of Information Act took us a year. And they took us to court. So, Mr. Chair, trying to get legitimate information for the taxpayers in Nova Scotia, because it's their money that we're using, has been very difficult. And the Premier has said many times that this would be an open and accountable government, and well, a little shy on both those terms, I think, as far as Nova Scotia taxpayers and their ability to get information on where this government has been going with their money. We have heard some positive words, I think, as far as the Minister of Education and his announcements that about money that he's putting into education, but he doesn't seem to acknowledge the money that this government has cut, and that they haven't brought up to the full level that it was when they took office. So I think when the minister is slapping himself on the back, he may want to make use of that Massage Therapist Act and make sure that he doesn't twist himself out of shape, congratulating himself because he has a ways to go yet. And a chiropractor, maybe, yes. But he has a ways to go yet in order to convince Nova Scotians that this government is really willing to live up to a commitment of supporting education in a way that actually will have an impact on Nova Scotia students, because it's certainly not obvious to us. Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, one other issue that isn't addressed here, and I would like to see the government address in their budget, is around the issue of our own source revenues that we should be able to gain in the offshore or in the forest sector or whatever sector when it comes to stumpage fees and royalties. And the government has not been willing to go down this road, and if it wants to convince Nova Scotians that the financial situation of this province is as dire as they make it out to be, then they're going to have to show that by making a greater effort to increase their revenues. And in this regard, they have not been willing. Not only have they not been willing to put their stumpage fees at the level of the marketplace, but they still have, I think, offered too much by ways of subsidies to those large corporations, and actually given them a competitive advantage over smaller operators in the forest sector. I was surprised to find out during the estimate process that there are around 300 registered buyers in Nova Scotia, and that only 56 or 57 of those have to submit their forestry plans to the government, that the rest do not, that their operations are small enough that they don't need to. But to consider that over 300 registered buyers exist and only 50 or so have to submit a plan, I think is a little bit worrisome. And I think that the government actually, in the $3 million that the government indicates that they're going to put into stewardship agreements, share in stewardship agreements with the mills, and the minister makes great fanfare of the fact that the mills and the private woodlot owners will contribute the same amount in kind, so actually the fund is really $9 million. But what he doesn't say is that about 3 mills actually would use up the biggest share of that. I think there was over 600,000 actually booked for Stora Enso. I think Irving's were in the $300,000, $400,000 area. So in those 2 mills, there was $1 million of the $3 million that the government had set aside for stewardship agreements. And that's only 2 of the 300 registered buyers. So if the government was really looking at some fairness or some real punch in its funding to actually address this issue in reforestation, then they better expand their funding significantly, or they better impact a little more fairness in who's able to get the money, because that was only 2 of a number of very large mills. So I would say that that even of the 56 who have to submit forestry plans, there's going to be precious little funding by this government to ensure reforestation actually occurs in any way, shape, or form in this province. And it has always managed to escape me why it is that we believe that planting trees is the only reforestation process or practice that can go on. The government has totally abandoned the notion that we cut more than we can sustain. In other words, if we woke up tomorrow and the whole province was cut, it wouldn't matter how many trees you planted. If you covered the whole province in trees, you're still not going to have a forest industry for 60 years. So this is an area that I think the government would be well advised to pay a little more attention. It can generate wealth in rural Nova Scotia, and it can do it in a way that it can be more fairly shared and contribute to the overall well-being of the province, to sustain the communities there. And this is something that it's obvious that the government isn't interested in. I know, Mr. Chair, that you would be well interested in this area, coming from the Eastern Shore, and there's a very active forestry group. The citizens there are very concerned about forestry practices, and they've really, which the member says he supports, and that'd be great if we could see that your government supported it, because there certainly hasn't been much initiative on their part. I want to speak a little bit more specifically to this Act and the terms of the section of the Act which provides a break, as far as I can see, to the casino. This is probably the most surprising, I think, part of this piece of legislation as to why the government felt the need to offer protection to the casino in light of the bylaw by the HRM for banning smoking in public places. I have to applaud the HRM for that initiative. I thought the resistance to that was significant enough that the council would probably back away from it, and I think they deserve recognition for their move in this regard, and other jurisdictions around the province actually who took the lead in bringing in bylaws that actually were stiffer and tougher than what the provincial law was. So I think they deserve real credit for doing that. But the fact that the government would actually turn around the next day and introduce an act that would really offer protection to the casino in light of the HRM bylaw was amazing. I'm struck by their lack of concern, if not for the patrons. I know the members will say it's a question of choice, but in terms of the workers, it's blatantly unfair, and it's I think goes against all that we should believe around health and safety in the workplace. And if they want to make the argument, well, it's a matter of choice for workers too. In other words, they can just leave and go to work somewhere else. Well, I'm not sure what world they live in. I mean, if there's anybody who has a tenuous position in this world, it's us. In the next few months, we'll determine how many of us come back here, and the electorate will determine those of us that will continue to represent them in this job. So we have about the most fragile positions of anybody I could think of in the province, and so to make a statement that workers who work anywhere else can somehow just pick up and move on to some other place and be reemployed, if they have families and commitments, etc., they have to do what they have to do in order to take care of their number one priority, are the people who are closest to them and their commitment to them. And I think the landmark case by Heather Crow, who actually came to this House to really acknowledge how serious workplace injuries can be, because she certainly was a victim, someone who was dying of cancer, and the workers' compensation system in Ontario was forced to recognize that and give her compensation. And this should be a message for this government. I mean, judges will recognize that secondhand smoke in the workplace is a condition of work that they need not put up with. And I think that this government would be well advised to allow the bylaw for the HRM to impact businesses all across the HRM, and not be running out to preempt any call by the casino. I think their lack of response to the bylaws in Cape Breton would indicate that that's not a problem for them. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, we've had residents here from the Residential Society who have really tried to make a case on behalf of themselves and the people they care for. And I think I would be the first one who can say what the impact of these people and their work is on the lives of those that they care for. I know the members of the House would be well aware of the issues around Rick Osborne in Link House, and although a completely different issue, but he is a resident of a group home that is cared by workers who do this exact same type of work. And the impact that has on his life and the other residents is profound. They're the family. They're the people who take these people shopping. They take them to programs. Members live in the homes with the residents. I mean, you have to be very committed in order to take on a job like this, and it would be great if the government would show as much commitment to the workers as the workers have shown to the residents. There's a group home in Lance, which has been operating, I would say, for 20, 25 years perhaps. The workers there, I got to say, I'm really concerned about them. There was nothing in this budget. Actually, there's been nothing in successive budgets to show any concern for them. This is a valuable program that they carry out. I've said on the floor of this House on other occasions, Mr. Chair, that they haven't had a budget to work with since 1993-94. So it's pretty difficult to plan what you intend to do over the year if you don't know what kind of money that you're getting from government to deal with. And I can't believe the Department of Community Services could let that go this long. They're almost up to 10 years now. They really exist at the goodwill of the banks. When they run up their overdraft enough, Community Services has come in, and sometimes they'll have a $50,000 overdraft. and community services has come in and paid that down for them. But that's no way to plan. In other words, they keep this thing running by Baylor, Twine, and Haywire, but there's no long-term progressive plan to ensure that these programs are in place, or what is going to happen to the residents or the employees there. And actually, these employees have no pension plan, and some of them have been there for many years. And I think the government should show its commitment to this whole sector by treating all the people who work in it much more fairly. So I had mentioned, I think the other day in the House when we talked about this bill previously, that the Lance Group home has really come to an impasse. It's in a difficult situation. Corridor Community Options is another branch that comes under community services in terms of the clients of the group homes or the residents. This is the program side for these residents, and Corridor Community Options, which was previously known as Endale Industries, carries out furniture refinishing. They have a contract with Air Canada to redo the headsets for the airplanes, which has been a contract that's really been important to keep that facility going. And the government at least has seen fit to ensure that the employees there do have a pension plan. And I'm amazed that under this umbrella of community services, we have these two branches, one which has been, I think, treated a little more fairly than the other, and the government seems to be resistant to offer any support to those people who work in the group home area. So I want to advise the government to look at this more seriously, and certainly the minister, that this is an area that's been neglected far too long. And I also want to make the comment that we are in dire need of more of these residential services in Hants East. The number of individuals who are being cared for at home by their families is significant, and they would really like to have available spaces for their loved ones so that someone could certainly look after them. And it's mostly parents who are getting elderly who are doing that, and they're really finding it difficult to keep up this commitment of good care to their loved ones. So with those comments, Mr. Chair, and I may come back and speak to this again, these are issues that I see are areas that the government has fallen down in terms of this Financial Measures Act. The residential care providers looking for $5 million actually that would bring them up to the same level of pay as hospital workers. I cannot believe the government was willing to spend $68 million on $155 to some of Nova Scotians, roughly 400,000 I think, and leave another 300,000 out that this $155 doesn't go to, but was willing to spend $68 million in that regard, but is not willing to spend $5 million to see that these workers get paid the same wage as others who do the exact same work. I guess if you want to define unfair, there's the definition. So will not be supporting the act, Mr. Chair, and I'll relinquish my time and let another member speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Member from Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to speak on this bill, on the title of this bill, here in the Committee of the Whole House on Bills, because that gives me an opportunity to speak generally on the bill and on the financial performance of this government. Now, if I had a file that was that thick or thicker, it would hardly begin to scratch the surface on the financial performance of this government. I've challenged it repeatedly to demonstrate how going deeper and deeper into debt daily constitutes balancing the budget, and how having done that puts us into a better position financially than we've been in for 40 years. because those are the main claims that they make to have some claim to fame. They've balanced the budget for the first time in 40 years. Now, 40 years goes back a long way. It goes back to 1963. And in 1963, the government of Nova Scotia was Tory, headed by the Honourable Robert Lawrence Stanfield. But they assert today that that government of Robert Stanfield did not balance the budget. It ran a deficit annually, every year, until they left power in 1970 under the leadership of G.I. Smith. Is that claim historically accurate? Is that claim supported by the budgets of those days that we have in the legislative library? Do they report an operating deficit year by year? The answer is, Mr. Speaker, that they do not. They do not. They report that the healthy finances of the province at that time continued to improve. And then in 1970, the Liberals came to power under Gerald Regan with Peter Nicholson as Minister of Finance, and it is maintained by students of that period in history that the Liberal government of Gerald Regan ran a surplus every year. Yes. I suppose if I stood up here and said that Hammurabi balanced the budget, they'd equally guffaw at that. They don't know what they're talking about. At that time, it was held by Mr. Nicholson, who sat just over there, that each year's budget was balanced. And he was very proud of that fact, as was Gerald Regan. And that government, in one of the 8 years they were in power, did have a slight deficit. But that they admitted. They did not claim to be running a surplus when they were actually running a deficit. They were running a surplus, and they did balance the budget. Then John Buchanan came to power in 1988. And what happened then? Well, as we know, Honest John was of the view, don't worry, be happy. All is well. We're in power, and Greg Kerr and various others, Chuck McNeil, they struggled with the books and with the numbers as best they could. And each year, what about Peter? I just mentioned Peter Nicholson. If you had been awake, you would have heard me. Now, do I know where Peter Nicholson was from? He was from Annapolis East, from Bear River. No, Mavis Buchanan was from Bear River. Annapolis Royal, that's near Bear River. So it's in the same neck of the woods. Now, why are we arguing about where Bear River is? Because we're supposed to be here balancing the budget. That's what we're supposed to be doing. But in any event, we did have troubles in the 1980s, and I admit also in the 1990s. And I admit that Donnie Cameron was the first premier of the Tory premiers, 3 in a row, Buchanan, Bacon, and Cameron. Cameron was the first one to recognize that there was a financial problem. The others had said, no, there isn't. And that was that. Cameron said, yes, there is. And so what did he do about it? The answer is that he privatized Nova Scotia Power, thereby buying himself about 15 additional months of breathing space before the financial problem would kick in again. So that was the Cameron answer. Then John Savage came to power. John Savage had a vision of trying to get this province out of the financial trouble that the Tories had put it into, and he instituted some methods, and I say this on the day of his passing, he instituted some methods which in their time were, shall I say, controversial. That's putting it mildly. But the point is that there was recognition made by the government of Nova Scotia to try to reverse this tendency, this trend that had come about under the Buchanan years, and change it to one where we would be on our feet. That's what this government now pretends to be doing themselves. They say, yes, the Savage vision was correct in a sense of an abstract concept, and we are the ones that have done it. For the first time, they say, in 40 years, thereby placing themselves above Robert Stanfield, above G.I. Smith, above John Buchanan, above Roger Bacon, and above Donnie Cameron, and above John Hand. Because they're saying this now, year number 4 of their mandate in power, is the first time in 40 years we've balanced the budget. That means to say, all right, they've been in power 4 years. That means to say that in year 1 and in year 2, they mustn't have balanced the budget. They only now say they finally hit the mark. Now, how did they do that? The answer is they did it by new mathematics, by bringing in a new system of accounting. One set of books. Call it what you will. But they brought in new methods of cooking the books so that they could make this claim of having balanced the budget. That's what they did. Now, on what evidence do they base that claim to fame? The evidence that we have is that they have gone deeper and deeper and deeper into debt to balance the budget. That's how they've done it. What was the deficit in 1988 or in 1972? You answer that kind of stuff. Listen to me talk. I got the floor. Now, where were we? Where are we? Mr. Speaker, their claims are not accurate because anybody who knows anything about banking would know that if you drive yourself deeper and deeper into debt, to show a paper surplus on a week-by-week basis, saying, well, in this 1 week, I didn't spend more than I took in because I took in all these additional loans and all this extra credit, and I maximized my visa, and I borrowed everything I could at the Commerce, and I got another loan on top of that from the credit union, so I balanced the books for this week. Would that claim hold up to any objective analysis? And the answer is, in all probability, it wouldn't. Only if the analysts involved did not know proper methods of bookkeeping. Because I'm sure you can find somebody who will tell you anything that you want to hear. You'll even find people who will say, the Tories in government have done a good job. They may be rare, they may be hard to find, but I'm sure if you dig deep enough, you'll find them. Because you can find people that would adhere to anything, any prospect, any introspection. All right, so there's an example of it across the way. But you know, Mr. Speaker, their record in power doesn't impress those that are looking for real substance. It reminds me almost of the record of the Social Credit Party in Alberta. And I mention that because I lived in Edmonton for 2 years. Very few know that about me, but I'll confess my sins now. They say confession is good for the soul. I lived in Edmonton for 2 years. And when I was there, and the most recent time I was there was last year, I noticed a number of things about Alberta that are different from other provinces in Canada. For one thing, if you drive down a main street, you'll find along it branches of various banks like we have here, but you also find provincial treasury branches, which are owned and operated by the government of the province of Alberta as banks. And there's nothing illegal about that. There's no law in Canada that says that the province of Nova Scotia couldn't run a bank if they wanted to. They don't, but they could if they desired to. The province of Alberta runs provincial treasury branches, which function as banks, because of the legacy of the Social Credit Party in power. That's how they got there. Because the Social Credit Party came to power in 1936 based on the platform, on the promise that they would issue money to the people. $25 a month, not $155, but $25 each and every month to every adult citizen of Alberta, not just those who paid income tax, but every single one over 21 years of age would get $25 a month from the provincial government. Now, how do they propose to finance that? Well, they propose to finance it the same way this crowd does, by going deeper and deeper into debt. Because they said the province as a whole has credit based on its natural resources and the combined wealth of all its people. And that we will call social credit. That's where that term came from. And so, based on this social credit, we will make available to the people the purchasing power that they need so that goods and services will get flowing once again. And this depression will come to an end. So we'll issue $25 a month to everybody. That's our promise. And the people elected them. I think they gave them every seat in the province, or very close to it anyway. I think there were 2 Liberals and 2 members of the Tory party and 61 social creditors in the Alberta legislature elected in 1935. Now, when they got into power, could they do it? Well, the answer is no, they could not. because they couldn't raise the kind of money they needed to do that based on social credit. There was no credit available that they could tap into. So the next idea that they got is, well, we'll buy printing presses and we'll print our own money. The province of Alberta will pay you the sum of $1 on demand. And they printed all kinds of money. We're ready to distribute it to all the starving farmers. When word came down from the Supreme Court in Ottawa, they didn't have the legal power to do this, because a province in Canada does not have the power to issue money. And so the money of the province of Alberta, Mr. Chairman, was no good. So what did they do next? Well, they came out with cards that were sort of like a ration card in World War II, and it had 31 days on it for the month. And every day of the month, you would get a stamp that you pasted onto your card. And when the card had $2 worth of stamps on it, you could cash that in. And where could you cash it in at? At the provincial treasury branch, because by that time they had been set up to do this. And I think it lasted for 1 month before they ran out of money to pay this stuff. But anyway, they tried. And that's always the way to get home in a thing, if it seems that you tried. Now, how does all that relate to this bill here? Well, this bill here attempts to do the same thing that Bill Aberhart tried to do in Alberta. It's going to issue social credit. What kind of social credit? $155 a month or a year or whatever until the next election as a tax rebate. And this bill here, this bill number 36, that's the bill to make all this lawful. That's the enabling legislation to make this social credit payoff possible. So, I want to outline briefly what happened in Alberta. Aberhart was not able to do what he wanted to because of 3, I think, successive rulings from the Supreme Court of Canada that he did not have the legal power to do so. Now, they attempted to appeal that to the Privy Council of the House of Lords, or the Judicial Council of the House of Lords in London. But even they ruled against the government of Alberta that they did not have the power to issue this social credit. Now, I don't know if the same thing is going to happen on this legislation or not. I would think that it would be unlikely, and I'll tell you why. Because this bill does provide for the funding of this measure. It doesn't provide for the Minister of Finance to be bought a printing press so that he can print off $155 notes and mail them out to people. It provides for them to come, the money, from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the province of Nova Scotia, which is legal. But it's a lien against that balanced budget that they say is the first time they've done it in 40 years. Well, Mr. Chair, the cost to sending out the $155 social credit payments to the people of Nova Scotia in total is $85 million, I'm reliably advised. Now, how can you balance the budget, which I think they claim to have balanced by $4 million, by putting a lien against it of $85 million as a subtract? I mean, doesn't that pull you under? Doesn't that put you into the hole? If you had a surplus of $4 million and you take $85 million away from it, my arithmetic gives me a deficit of $81 million in the hole as a result of doing that. Now, that's the financial consequences of this Financial Measures Act that we're debating right now. That's what it's going to do. It's going to destroy the Conservative claim to fame and the grounds on which they seek re-election. So in a bid, Mr. Chair, to try and help the Conservative Party, avoiding the path to ruin, I think we should try to hold up the passage of this bill so that they can say they balance the budget, so that they can go to the people with a truthful claim, instead of saying, we had a balanced budget, but we gave away $155 to everybody, and so now we don't have it anymore. It's gone. It was an illusion. We're back to year number 41 of the 40 years, plus one more now, of unbalanced budgets. Well, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, I don't think that the average voter in Nova Scotia cares very much about most of what I've just said. Probably that most of them don't care at all. Because if you send people $155 a month, they like it. Even if you send it to them only once a year, they'll take it. I don't doubt that. I don't know of anybody. I don't even think Alexa McDonough will send back her $155 check and donate it to the province. I think she'll put it in her bank account and make it that much fatter. I believe that. But there will be many people that will not be wooed or wowed or whatever it is into voting Tory as a result of that check. Because that's not the way you get elected in Nova Scotia. I see the honourable member for Cape Breton Centre down there. And he's a man like myself who works hard to get elected. And that's how you get elected, by working hard, not by passing out free money. I've seen the argument used against my own party, the Liberal Party, that you can't buy your way into power, although the Liberal Party has been in power for most of the years that I've lived. But when the family allowances was first proposed, the NDP say, we made them do it, but they admit that the Liberals did it. The Tories at that time argued against the family allowance. I'm saying at the time the legislation was before Parliament to be passed, like this bill is before our Legislative Assembly now to be passed, the Tories in Ottawa, in Parliament, argued against the legislation for family allowances, saying that it would have two effects, bad effects. One was that it would encourage people to have large families and make more children because they get more money. But the second thing was that it would encourage people to vote Liberal, God forbid. So for those two reasons, the Tories were dead against family allowances when that measure came up in Parliament. For similar reasons, the Tories were against unemployment insurance because they said, well, that's paying people not to work, as a result of which they won't want to work anymore. They'd rather stay home and get this free money from the government. Also, they said, and they'll know that the Liberals put this thing through, and so they'll vote Liberal. So again, the Tories were against the unemployment insurance. And you can go on and on for the various social measures that make up the modern Canada that we know and provide for the tremendous difference between this country and the United States of America. Because those who have traveled to the States, Mr. Chair, know the difference between, for example, in the States, they have no Medicare. They have no hospital insurance. If you get sick, you have to pay to get into the hospital. The rates are enormous. They're enough to bankrupt you, Mr. Chairman. Even you, Mr. Chairman. They're enough to bankrupt. Plus the cost of the doctors, who charge so much for every pill and for every needle, just like a lawyer who charges $175 an hour for hours that last 3 minutes. That kind of thing. You know, that's how medicine is run in the United States. The only way the average American citizen can get by is either if they have health care coverage through their employment, such as members of the armed forces, or if they have private insurance paid for every month by purchasing insurance from an insurance agent. If you don't have one or the other, you're in trouble. Likewise, in the United States, they don't have any unemployment insurance at the national level. They do have Social Security, and that was a result of the Roosevelt government, which was one of the most left-wing governments that country ever had, that put through Social Security. But their Social Security is in no ways equal to the Canadian old age pension, guaranteed income supplement, and Canada pension benefits combined. Because in this country, Mr. Speaker, every single old age pensioner 65 or above, single or married, is guaranteed a personal income of not less than $1,100 a month. That's what the OASGIS pays to anybody who doesn't have CPP entitlement. No one is below $1,100 a month in Canada, except maybe immigrants that come here from other countries late in life. And even they qualify after a certain number of years of residence here. You go to the United States and see if people there can get the benefits Canadians take for granted here. The answer is they're nowhere near us. They're nowhere near us. Those that worked for large companies like AT&T and have company pension plans, they do well in their retirement years. Those that worked on a farm picking cotton or something like that, they got nothing in their retirement years. They are a drain on society. I mean a real drain. Not the way our senior citizens here are, that may not have enough money to be able to be housed in the homes they have for the elderly. They have to be subsidized by the Department of Community Services. In the United States, it is far worse. The richest country on earth, in many ways, providing for its people at the poorest level imaginable. All European countries are head and shoulders over the States, as is Canada, due to the fact that we in this country have had progressive, enlightened, compassionate, liberal governments over the years. That's why. That's the difference. Now, where was I in dealing with this bill? Getting into all that. Well, I was trying to make the point that this government is, in a way, copycatting the Liberals. Because the Liberals give money to the people, now the Tories are saying, and we too are going to give money to the people, you see. But the problem is that they're not doing it the right way. And their methodology, their motivation in doing this is wrong. Now, is there a question down here from Cape Breton Center? No? Okay. Their motivation is wrong because this thing is timed not to meet public need, nor even really to abolish poverty, but rather to meet their immediate election needs. That's why it's being done. That and for no other reason. Why is it only going to be paid at the end of June? Why not in July and in August and in September and so forth? Well, if it cost them $85 million to do it in June, it cost them another $85 million each successive month if they kept it up, and they haven't got the money. So they're putting all their apples into one basket. Do it one time only. And that way, they hope to get home. Now, I'm not going to say anything about the young man running against me on the Conservative ticket. He has a perfect right to do so. And I'm not going to say anything against the even younger man that they're planning to run in Cape Breton South. I think he's 23, because he has a right to run. He has a right to run. But will those types of candidates get elected in those ridings because of this $155 payment? Mr. Chairman, I don't withdraw my earlier contention that in the Sydney, New Waterford, Glace Bay area, all Conservative candidates will lose their deposits. And that's not because of this government. It's not because of the $155. It's because of the fact that the Conservative Party has so consistently let the people down where I come from, that they haven't got a hope in you-know-where of getting a vote. They haven't. They closed down the steel plant. They like to say, well, the federal government closed down the coal mines. Well, the federal government did that after the voters, in their folly, removed the Honourable David C. Dingwall from Parliament, the man who was keeping Cape Breton Island afloat. And they themselves, I suppose you could say, created the problem that led to the coal mines being closed. But the fact is that whatever the cause was of the coal mines being closed, this government stood by, wiped its hands of the matter and said, well, we don't need to do anything, and walked away. That's what they did on the coal mines, and on the steel plant, they shut her down. And they did more than shut it down. I took a friend of mine recently who was from outside the pier on a drive on one of the back streets in Whitney Pier that overlooks the steel plant, because you don't see this from Victoria Road. You have to go to the side streets and over the hill, and then you see the steel plant. And you know what? There wasn't any steel plant there at all, Mr. Chairman. The steel plant had all been torn down, right from the docks backwards up the plant. The Open Hearth Department used to be the biggest building in the city of Sydney. Gone. No trace of it. The blast furnaces, one of them was worth $83 million, brand new, installed by John Buchanan, never rolled a drop of iron. Never rolled a drop of iron. Now torn down and gone. The blast furnaces are gone. The Open Hearth is gone. The buildings behind them are being torn down right now one by one and sold as scrap. Ships are coming in to load at the Cisco Wharf. The scrap is weighed before being put aboard the ship, because you can't take a ship out of the water to weigh it to see how much scrap it's taken aboard. You weigh the scrap first and then load. But anyway, they're selling off the steel plant as scrap metal to the scrap markets of the world, to be taken to China, to India, to be re-rolled into steel so that we Canadians can buy that steel and use it. That's what's happened. That is the Tory government's record in office. And you try to convince somebody who comes from Whitney Pier that that isn't the Tory record, and that all that should be looked past, overlooked, so that you can concentrate on this nice $155 check that this bill is going to provide in the mail at the end of June. And to use a saying that my friend from Halifax Atlantic used to use when he was leader of the NDP, he used to say, Mr. Speaker, it don't cut it. That's what he used to say. Remember that? It don't cut it. Well, this bill doesn't cut it, Mr. Speaker. Or Mr. Chairman, I should say. Monsieur le Président. As I said in Polish, Panie Prezydencja. That's all you. Now, there's a lot of other things bad about this bill. It's sort of a collection of bills. It's under one title of Financial Measures Act, but it has all kinds of things in it. It's got an amendment to the Summary Proceedings Act, and it adds a new category to the Summary Proceedings Act that sets out penalties for offenses identified by categories, so that if the fine before was not less than $1,500, it's going to go up now to, well, it provides new and higher fines. Probably that's how they'll raise the money to pay for the $155 checks. As the fines go up, the payments to the people can thus be financed. So that's in this act. There's another section in here, a whole page on the Revenue Act, page 15, part 7, and it increases the taxes on cigarettes. I told you how when Newfoundland was just about to join Canada, that Joey Smallwood and the federal government lined up together to lower the tax on cigarettes and on chewing tobacco. Well, now, in this late day and age, they're going to increase the tax on cigarettes. Another way of raising the money to pay for the $155 checks, through fines and through higher taxes. Another matter here on the Revenue Act affecting people who sell gasoline or diesel oil, and also affecting consumers, purchasers, agents, wholesalers, and vendors. And new minimum penalties are to be provided for all of those people so that they can be gouged. And as they're gouged, the money will be poured into a spout that will go down to the printing press, printing off $155 checks. That's the new order here in Nova Scotia. The Nova Scotia Power Privatization Act, this is at page 14. What have they got in there? Well, they've got a clause to lower the payment by Nova Scotia Power for this year, and then to increase it next year. By how much? The bill doesn't say. Is it 50 cents? Is it $50 million? Is it somewhere in between? We don't know. It's a blank check. Whatever they want, they can decrease the payment by Nova Scotia Power to the government this year and jack it up next year after the election is over. So Nova Scotia Power will thereby have this carrot offered to them in the election year. Pay less now, pay more later. That's what the bill does at Section 24. Then there's Clause 25. This is a nice one. I'd really like to know the meaning of this one, because it takes the Workers' Compensation Board and says that it is not a government agency any longer. It repeals the clause in the Public Service Act that makes the Workers' Compensation Board a government agency. Now, what is the effect of that? I don't know. I don't know. I'm about to retire. Is there any use in my applying to the Minister of Labour to get put on the Workers' Compensation Board? I don't know, because they don't explain what this clause means. Right now, there's a clause in one of the acts, I forget which, that says that any retired MLA who is drawing a pension and works for a government board or agency shall have the amount of their pension deducted from their pay and shall only be paid the difference, which, if translated into real life, means you could be working for nothing or next to nothing. I don't know how my good friend from Sackville Cobequid would have looked after himself if we had appointed him to the Utilities and Review Board, because we were quite prepared to do that, but we didn't change that law that I just talked about, and so he would have only gotten the difference between his pension and what the Utility Board pays its members, which might have worked out to perhaps $1.55 or maybe $155 to be more appropriate per month or per year, you know? Now, does this have the effect of removing the Workers' Compensation Board from that prohibition, so that a retired MLA who wants to do something useful and not sit around twiddling his thumbs can say, well, I'll apply to get put on the Workers' Compensation Board? The government doesn't explain that point to interested parties, you see, because they want this thing just to slip through unopposed, unexamined, and uncorrected. Well, that's the Workers' Compensation Board. They have 2 more clauses on this, giving the Public Service Commission power to provide direction to the Compensation Board to respect collective bargaining and general compensation levels for its non-bargaining unit employees. Now, I don't know what that one means, but Mr. Chair, it could well be a blank check to abolish collective bargaining at the Workers' Compensation Board. For all I know, you can't trust this crowd. Give them unlimited and unshrouded powers, and they'll use them. That's their way. They're not going to ask for powers that they don't want. They're not going to ask for rights that they don't think they need. And it goes on with all kinds of other similar little prohibitions. See, I want to talk in general terms, Mr. Chair, about this bill, because we were discussing in our caucus, I suppose I'm not to say what happens in caucus, but being I'm the only one here, and there's no answered, why would they need to pass this bill before they call the election? Couldn't they do it all by OIC? Well, the answer is yes and no. You could do the things about the $155 checks by ordering council, no question. I mean, the power is there. They can requisition, I believe it's up to half or a third of next year's budget. But the budget for this year is passed anyway. So that gives them the legal authority to spend the money, and they can make up checks for $155 and send them out if they want to, you know. But the other things that I was just talking about, it would be kind of hard to do by OIC, because it would seem like the loss of responsible government in Nova Scotia if the cabinet were to meet in the bunker or wherever they now meet and amend the Summary Proceedings Act to provide for higher fines. You know, you can't do that kind of thing by ordering council. What about the... Just ask Jim Spur. Jim Spur drafts those orders for a living. I'm sure he's well paid to do it. But I don't know if Jim Spur would support them increasing fines by ordering council. Is he taking them to court? I think he is. I read that in the paper somewhere at the bottom of page 42. Yeah. The other powers that they're seeking in here to increase the tax on cigarettes. Well, the power to tax the people is vested in this House here. It's not vested in the cabinet. The cabinet can tax as a result of legislation we have passed here, yes. But to go on their own and increase the tax on cigarettes simply by passing an order in council, I don't think they could do it. Now, this is just my legal opinion, and there's no $175 an hour cost. But I can tell you, you know, that's what I think on these matters. That's why I think we're here, because they feel, after research and reflection, that what they need to have a clean sweep of the next election is for us to pass this bill and give them the legal powers to do the things that are in it. That's why we're here. That's why hour after hour is being chewed up in repeated examination of the contents of this bill. Now, for all the reasons that I've just said, does the bill merit support? Well, I leave that one to you, Mr. Chair, to figure out. I would suggest that it doesn't. It's not well motivated. It's not well timed. A measure like this, passed on the very eve of calling an election, suggests to me a government that has lost it, that has gotten out of control, that needs to be reined in. Now, it can be reined in, of course, on election night. That's true. But in the meantime, we have certain powers over here, and we're going to use them. I know they have powers, too, over there. I know about closure, and I know about the hammer, and I know about all those things, and in my time I gave advice on some of those things, but I don't anymore. I just know they're there. The government House Leader knows they're there, too. And if they want to get out of here on Thursday, I think they have the mechanisms to do it. I'm not recommending them, but they could do it, because we've sat here 24 hours. 24 hours per day to get some measure through that they said was absolutely needed for the welfare of Nova Scotia. And then when it was passed and Tuesday or Wednesday came, they rolled up their sleeves and said, you know, we really didn't need that bill at all. We got other things to do. Let's get to work. That's the record. And they do it for the nurses, and they did it for the ambulance people and the paramedics and any other group that got in their way. And there's a crowd outside right now, and they don't like those people very much. I don't think they're going to nominate them to the Order of Canada or whatever. They're not even going to give them 2 cents. See? They have $155 for some categories of people, but they have no money at all, not even a couple of dollars for the workers that are out on strike against them. Well, let me say this about that. I don't like the motivation or philosophy behind the bill. It's not equal. You know, when Aberhart was promising money to the people of Alberta, he said everybody would get it, everybody over 21. And they had silly arguments like, well, what about the people that are in mental homes? You know, or the people that are suffering from a learning disorder. Oh, don't worry, said Mr. Aberhart, we'll give it to them too. We'll give it to everybody. That was his approach, the universalist approach, eh? But this bill has a very exclusivist approach. Only those that pay taxes, only those that pay income taxes, not those that pay taxes at the checkout at the grocery store, not those that pay taxes every time they buy a package of cigarettes, not those that pay taxes every time they buy a bottle of beer. You know, there are many taxes that don't count. Not those that buy license plates, not those that buy fishing licenses, not those that pay any of the horrendous mishmash of costs and fees and regulatory provisions to charge you this and to charge you that. My goodness, one of these days they'll be putting a new tax on alarm clocks so that you can pay a special tax to get up in the morning. That's their mentality. So, with all these different taxes that are going to increase, and then pay the $155 only to those who pay income taxes. And if you read the bill, I'm not going to do it. Don't say I can't read. But without my glasses, I find it hard. But they have poems here. Poems. They have parts here. Parts explaining what a taxpayer is. And it gets very technical. So if you didn't file a tax return for the year 2002 or for the year 2001 before March 31st of 2003 or something like this, all these things, you don't qualify. You don't count, even if you did pay income taxes. You have to have had your income tax return in on time and correct, you know? It was like when I was first a school teacher, you were judged by the condition of your register. And the superintendent of schools would come around, look at your register, and if that all the top names or all the last names one under another in a perfect line, and then all the first names one under another in a perfect line, and the middle names, you were considered to be a good teacher because your register was in order. And in order to do that, you got a yardstick and a pencil, and you drew a little line, and then you wrote all the names in on that little line, and then you erased the little line, and it looked perfect. That's how you got to be a good teacher. All right. Now, they're doing that kind of thing here to the taxpayers, saying you have to be a qualified taxpayer to get the bonus. And if you don't get it. Now, what effect is that going to have on the people of Nova Scotia? I know they think it's going to make them all vote Tory. Election night will tell whether it does or not. I say it won't. But aside from that, it's going to create division within our people. Because, you know, when Mr. Corbett gets his check for $155 and Mr. Godet doesn't, how is Mr. Godet going to feel about that? He's going to be hopping mad. He's going to say, they cheated me. I got robbed. I can just imagine. He'll say it in English, et aussi en français. Yes. Oui. So, you know, all these things are going to result from the passage of this bill unless it is amended in a very great way. It would have to be amended, I would think, to say that this law shall apply to all citizens of Nova Scotia, even him, to all, as long as they are 18 years of age. Would you support that amendment? Maybe. Think it over. All right. Yeah. But to divide the population saying you pay income tax, you don't, you get a check, you don't, it just doesn't seem right. you know? It doesn't seem to me like a well-thought-out way of getting people to vote progressive conservative. In fact, it seems almost like, what was it that Stalin used to find in Russia? The saboteurs that were out to try to destroy everything. And they were given special assignments in labor camps, I think, if they weren't shot. But it seems like somebody has been doing that to the Tory party with this bill and trying to undermine their chances to have goodwill at the polls. I think I'll conclude on this note, Mr. Speaker, that I won 9 elections in a row. And I ran on different tickets and all the rest, and all that is a matter of history. But I learned one thing from that experience, and that is that the way that you win elections, aside from hard work that I've already advocated, is that you have to earn goodwill with the people. That's what you have to do. You don't want them to think that you're a cheat or a liar or a wife beater or any of those kinds of things. They don't get you votes. They drive them away. What you want them to do is to think of you as a good, honest person who's trying your level best to help them and is on their side. I learned that from Rolly Thornhill. He always used to tell people, especially when they were upset, I'm on your side. And it tended to calm them instead of making them more riled up. But what this government should do is tell the people of Nova Scotia, we're on your side. We're not trying to divide you. We're not trying to pit neighbor against neighbor. We're not trying to pit family against family or family member against family member. How are brothers and sisters going to react when brother A gets the check and brother B doesn't? And brother C, maybe he's got the check, but the name on it is spelled wrong and he can't cash it because somebody made a mistake. All those kinds of things we're trying to eliminate for them. That's why I'm on my feet right now. They don't recognize what I'm trying to do for them as a favor, but as well-intentioned, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, I speak from the heart, and I am really trying to help them from their wayward ways and back onto the straight path, because if they really did do what Aberhart said he would do in Alberta and give $25 a month to everybody, I think they might earn some goodwill that way. Might not be enough goodwill to overcome having shut down the Sydney steel plant, you know. But it might be a step in that direction towards forgiveness, perhaps, of all their mistakes during the time that they've been in power. Now, is that enough to generally register my opinion on the bill? Or do you think I should go further? Is there another speaker ready to go? Frank? All right. Well, my honourable friend from New Waterford has much wisdom to offer, so I think at this point I'll take my seat.
The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I don't know, it seems more often than not in committee that I follow the esteemed member from Nova, and it's always, I'm sure for anybody that's out viewing this, it's a certain letdown from his ability to verbalize what he does and stands for. Then you have to listen to me. So I'll trundle along. I'll trundle through this and bring up a few, I hope to be coherent points, and points that are, I think, relevant to this Bill 36, the Financial Measures Act. And to probably very few people's surprise, I want to go and talk to this as it relates to the Nova Scotia Government Employees Union that are on strike outside this building as we speak today, Mr. Chair, because it's an interesting point where we find where government has put this group, because it's strange in as much as that both the unionized employees and the employer agree that what's needed here is proper funding from government. And where government fails to come forward here is any substantive increase in per diem rates. Now, we know, and we've seen just over the past year, per diem rates include in the private sector in long-term care, where for-profit homes have merely sent off to the Department of Health and said, look, we've built a new building and we're raising our per diem rates. Some have gone up close to $50 a day. Yet here we have a group looking after some of our most special citizens of this province, and it's been about 10 years since there's been any substantive increase in their per diem. So one has to ask, what is the fairness? Why does the government seem to be able to come forward with funding in relation to a for-profit group, yet does not give that same courtesy to not-for-profit looking after these special people, Mr. Speaker? And I think that goes beyond a philosophical point. It goes right to the heart of what this government's all about. I recall today my colleague from Dartmouth North asking questions about the strike situation, and instead of the minister coming forward and saying, "Look, I will do my duty as a member of the Crown or as a member of this government to move forward and try to find a resolve with both the workers and the management of RRSS." Excuse me. What he does, he instead makes a flippant comment about, well, your leader says this. Well, you know what our leader said, and I will stand by that as anybody on our benches will stand by, is the fact that this strike wouldn't last as long as it is today if there was anti-scab legislation. And that minister, to say those words in this House, being a former Minister of Environment and Labour himself, to say those words and not to be inflammatory, I would put forward, as opposed to being conciliatory, is causing problems, because although he may have been a minister of that department, certainly I don't think he understands one iota about the collective bargaining process and how it relates to the resolution of a workplace stoppage. So why would that minister then say those things? Well, I have to go back to my original point around this and say it is a government bent on not assisting workers in a meaningful way. I had talked today, put forward a resolution again about violence in the workplace regs. This has been on the books now since 1999. Government fails to recognize this, doesn't see it as a major component in which to bring forward positive change, positive resolution for workers in this province. You know, Mr. Speaker, I am quite proud when it comes to the labor movement and my background in it and my family's involvement and indeed my community's involvement, Mr. Speaker, because, you know, we're often, the industrialized Cape Breton area is often indeed credited with the mobilization and the acceptance of the Trade Union Act, the Trade Union Movement, excuse me, within this province, Mr. Speaker. And it's always been a point of like, people would put forward coal miners as the group that are probably the most militant, or were the most militant in this province. And to a point, they were correct. But I don't believe that bears out. What it is, it shows, I think, more about the movement itself. If you look at the coming from the 1800s to the 1900s into this century, Mr. Speaker, when you looked at that movement and where they had to take it from, and from the 1915 to 1925 and on up to through the Second World War years, Mr. Speaker, where they were truly one of the most militant unions in all of North America. And because it's like, and indeed, I think the only way you could describe it as class warfare, and in warfare, the first battles are usually the ones that incur the most casualties. They're the ones that you have to theoretically establish your beachhead. So therefore, I would say to you, Mr. Speaker, that it was the coal mining and steel workers of industrial Cape Breton that laid out the beachhead, if you will, for the trade union movement in Nova Scotia. But when we look at those groups post-Second World War, they were the ones that they had this foundation to build on and moved forward. But for some reason, successive governments would try and put out the erroneous feeling that these were a bunch of layabout workers who weren't interested in working hard and providing for their families, but more intent on just being known as union rabble-rousers or something like that. And I would contend to you, Mr. Speaker, that from post-war to this day, there has not been a group of workers more responsible in the workplace than coal miners, and allowed groups like we see today from the Nova Scotia Government Employees Union to be here and allow them the right to participate in a labor dispute. If you look at this government, as I said, Mr. Speaker, that there's very few pieces of solid labor legislation that this government has brought forward, Mr. Speaker. You know, well, we will talk about how the basic UMW in the coal mines of Cape Breton, how they were literally ahead of just about every piece of legislation for worker reform in this province, Mr. Speaker. You know, long before whether it was through the federal legislation or the provincial legislation, Mr. Speaker, many, many years before it, because I remember as a very young boy, my father was on the Health and Safety Committee at number 12 Colliery, Mr. Speaker, and I remember to this day that the chair was a gentleman by the name of Johnny Lalo, and I'm sure the member from Nova is well acquainted with Mr. Lalo and his right, and Ollie Wilson was another fellow heavily involved at that time, and Cecil, the Wilson boys were always in the front, Mr. Speaker, of workers' rights and workers' rights as it relates to safety. You know, as I start off saying, Mr. Speaker, long before that there was mandated in any labor codes or the Trade Union Act or the Labor Standards Act as it is in this province, these men were engaging their employer in safety practices within the within the workplace. And you had, if people had ever had the occasion to go by 12 Colliery when it was in operation, the hoist building and a couple of the other buildings, Mr. Speaker, the big sign you can see is number 12 Colliery, safety first. And these were workers leading the way, Mr. Speaker, leading the way for employers and indeed governments to help them. Mr. Speaker, you may say, what relation does that have to today? Well, the relationship is what we have here is, as I stated earlier, is we have people from RRSS that are in the gallery today and out in front of the building, and they are probably forging ahead and trying to break new ground with this government. The ground they're trying to break is probably not as probably historically going to resonate in a historical perspective like June 11th, 1925, when provincial police killed one William Davis, Mr. Speaker. No, and what we have these workers here today, what their purpose is to sit down with their employer and with the ghost that holds the money strings, Mr. Speaker, the purse strings, if you will, is the Department of Community Services. That they should sit down and acknowledge what has to be done to resolve this labor dispute. But you know, Mr. Speaker, there's nothing in either the budget nor in Bill 36 that would help accommodate that, Mr. Speaker. There's nothing coming forward from either the Department of Community Services or from the Department of Environment and Labor, and to call these sides together, and it's clearly within the realm of their responsibility from Environment and Labor to call the sides together, get the conciliator who has the file, and say, what else do you need? What can we do to help bring a resolution to this work stoppage? And it's simple, that both sides have said publicly, and they've said it by way of letter to the ministers and so on, is appoint an arbitrator, and we will we will agree to it. I mean, Mr. Speaker, if we go back to the days of Bill 68, and, you know, that piece of legislation, which really should never have, ever have been brought forward. It didn't have to happen. If members of the House will just think back to the reality of that situation, what it was, we had people involved in the collective bargaining process. We had arguably one of the finest labor conciliators, arbitrators in the country, in the name of Mr. Bruce Outhouse, having the sides together. And what Mr. Outhouse was attempting to do was to get the two parties together. And what had happened there was a news or media blackout during this round of negotiations. And the reason for that was quite simple, Mr. Speaker. So neither side could grandstand, so they could try and just concentrate on getting a collective agreement. But you know, Mr. Speaker, in the midst of trying to get a collective agreement, what does the government go and do? Does the government does the government go and say, look, we're going to let the process work? No. In the midst of a media blackout, when two parties are trying to get together to resolve the collective bargaining process, to get, as they say in negotiating parlance, get to yes, this government takes away any hope of that collective agreement ever being accepted by its members when they make the announcement that we're going ahead with legislation, no matter what comes out of there. So where does that leave the members of the bargaining unit? Well, they're saying, look, we can't deal on a trust level with this government, because while they're in one room negotiating, they're in another room building up a piece of legislation that's going to be injurious to us. So we're not going to agree to any collective bargaining agreement here, no matter what they come out with, because they're going to trundle forward with legislation that's not going to help us. So, Speaker, or Mr. Chair, that's why. Now, this government will be going to the polls soon, and it's going to be a government that's going to be known as going to be bookend by either side in the beginning and the end by labor disputes, and a whopping one in the middle, Mr. Speaker. We started off with the emergency medical technicians that operate our ambulance service, Mr. Speaker, and this government took them on over an issue that could have been, again, resolved at the bargaining table, Mr. Speaker. But this government intervened prematurely to the point that it caused a strike. It didn't stop a strike, it caused a strike. But, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, what could have been done if the government sat down and acted as the legitimate money holder that it is in those processes, that could have been rectified. But no, Mr. Speaker, again, showing, you know, all the nerve, you know, of a 7-year-old lost in the woods. It did a knee-jerk reaction and caused a strike. That was the opening salvo with labor with this government. In the middle of this government's tenure, we had a piece of labor legislation, Mr. Speaker, that would have probably made Idi Amin blush, because it brought forward a piece of anti-worker legislation that was never before seen in this province, Mr. Speaker, and a province that isn't exactly the greatest place for trade unions to start with. But Mr. Speaker, you had that Bill 68 again. It caused a work stoppage. It caused a work stoppage because a government that knew absolutely nothing about the collective bargaining process and intervened itself, threw itself in the middle with a useless, needless piece of legislation. And I say that with a fear of contradiction, because it was never, ever brought down to be empowered, Mr. Speaker. So therefore, we saw the uselessness of it. And what had happened? We were without services in our health care for 24 hours or so because this government would not negotiate on a level playing field. So that's the middle episode. Now we're here with workers on strike again. It's way too long on the street for these people. But what does the government do? The government keeps saying, we're not responsible. We're not responsible, Mr. Speaker. They're responsible when they hear the phone ring or the door knock when it's the casino. They see themselves as having a responsibility, a financial responsibility to those people. So why not? Although it's an arm's length, I mean, it's clearly there's the gaming authority which deals with the casinos. Yet, you know, I don't know what route the casinos took. Was it a circuitous route around the Gaming Commission? We don't know, because the Minister of Finance from time to time will waffle on whether it was the casinos had called him or he just thought it was a bad idea for the casinos. So I really don't know, Mr. Speaker. But what we do know out of that is that it was leadership by the municipalities that brought the smoking bans forward. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, why does government continue to listen to that group of individuals, but yet or big corporations, I should say, but not listen to the taxpayers of Nova Scotia, the workers who work at RRSS here in Halifax, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Chair, why would that government of this day think that their concerns are of enough validity that they should react to them? Why does the government keep hiding behind the fact that we're not the employer? Well, everybody knows when the money trail ends, it ends at Department of Community Services. It's just a lot of hogwash, Mr. Speaker, for a government to say that they're not responsible, they're not the ones that can end that strike. Well, you know, are they taking the line is that they've lost the ambulance attendants one, strike one. They lost on Bill 68, strike two. Is RRSS going to be strike three? And maybe it's more about their public image than helping the special Nova Scotians that are in care or looking after Nova Scotians to make a decent wage. And, you know, I've heard the minister from time to time saying that he believes that's a fair wage. And, you know, I wish the minister had availed himself last week when law amendments were on and the stories coming from the workers that were telling us what they had to put up with time in, day out. People getting paid for 20 hours a week, providing not just the 20 hours a week, but palliative care 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Basically being that person's soulmate for their last few days on this earth, Mr. Speaker, where they sat down and went through with all the compassion that I would think that would summon the angels, Mr. Speaker, that would say, how could you do this? They sat down with some individuals and kind of helped them from writing their life, if you will, Mr. Chair, to picking out the music that will be at their service, you know, and then for government and particularly ministers to stand in this House and say, well, you get paid well enough for that, Mr. Chair. I contend that that minister should be embarrassed to make that statement to these workers, Mr. Speaker. I mean, you look at the care they were given in the residential care homes, Mr. Speaker, compared to what the institutional type care they're now receiving at Simpson Hall, which is, you know, which will set back, I contend, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, I contend that will set back these residents for some time to come whenever we see a successful conclusion to this work stoppage and trying to make those poor souls' life right again. It will take some time, and it will be, I would say, on the heads of this government for their lack of compassion around not only these workers, but these residents, and for the government to stand in question period and blame the leader of the opposition because he believes that anti-scab legislation is a necessary tool in the trade union movement in this province is nothing less than shameful, Mr. Speaker. It speaks volumes about the lack of knowledge of that minister as it relates to the collective bargaining process, and he should be ashamed. And he should be ashamed, and he should go and be willing to debate outside of this House, Mr. Chair, what he means when he says those things, because it was a glib and irresponsible answer, and he will be made responsible for those, Mr. Speaker, at some point. You know, but this Financial Measures Act is, you know, one that, as this government always wants to talk about, is about its finances, whether we talk about the $155 or whatever. But you know what, Mr. Speaker, it never speaks. No time does this government ever really speak about its moral deficit. The moral deficit it has to the people of this province, to the vast majority of people who are in residential care who will not receive the $155, Mr. Speaker. The vast amount of people in poverty in this province that will not receive that $155. As a matter of fact, I believe one day in Lake Debate, the member from Kings North stood in his place and said, everybody's getting it. Everybody's getting it. And it was, you know, their own backbenchers didn't know who was getting it. So I wonder how informed, in essence, in fullness, this government is about what it's about to give. You know, another aspect I want to talk about in this bill is I almost lost for words, Mr. Chair, around the casinos and allowing smoke in the workplace. You know, I mean, Mr. Speaker, it's like you know, someone out here in Hollis Street, just everyone else is exiting the city, and this government's backing up down Hollis Street, Mr. Speaker, and causing congestion, because what it does is taking away workers' rights again. We've seen it through Heather Crow's experience in this House, and she came and she talked to the various caucuses and told them of her experience as a non-smoker and as part of a wait staff in the hospitality industry, and how she is dying because of that. This government wants to ignore that, wants to ignore the vast array of medical opinion that tells quite candidly that there's no such thing as a safe level of exposure to secondhand smoke. Yet this government is willing to roll the dice, if you pardon the pun around casinos, roll the dice with people's lives because they're afraid that the casinos may invoke a clause that would allow them to leave. And it speaks volumes of the skittishness of this government. If you're a big business, all you got to do is make a threat, and they react.
Don't even have to make the threat.
No, my colleague from Hants East says you don't even have to make the threat, and he's absolutely right. It's a presumed threat, and they react to it. So why is it that, you know, some international corporation that runs casinos, probably headquartered not even in North America, probably offshore somewhere, why is their bottom line more important than the bottom line of the very citizens of this province? And if it's a bottom line or the healthcare line, why is it? Why do they just circumvent them altogether and say it's more important because, you know, there's $110 million involved here? I realize no matter how you slice it, $110 million is a chunk of change. But, you know, it's not so much that they've ever really said. I mean, even up to this late date, that the casinos, I think as of last weekend, are still saying, well, we don't really think non-smoking is going to hurt us, but we want it there anyway. And it's just like, I mean, you talk about your hedges against inflation. These guys got hedges against hedges against hedges when it comes to workers' rights. But yet this government is willing to say, we've now placed the value on the workers at Casino Nova Scotia, and that value is $110 million. That's the value. So whatever amount of people that work for Casino Nova Scotia, both here in the Metro and in CBRM, we know to take that number of employees and divide it into $110 million, and we got the equivalent of what a life is worth to this government. So they're happy with that, obviously. They have done what many governments previous to them, and I would condemn much more learned people have come forward with, and that is, what's the value of a human life? They've come to it for us, and that's where it's all at. Yet, you know, they don't seem to care, Mr. Speaker. They don't seem to care about what the ultimate challenge faces a worker at a casino. We've seen just recently with Andrea Skinner's case that a federal tribunal had agreed with her and her position vis-a-vis smoke in the workplace. But you know what's really disturbing about that, Mr. Chair, is this, that if anybody questioned the mean-spiritedness that exists with Casino Nova Scotia, one would only have to look at that hearing, because it's so seldom that at the referee tribunal level at the EI appeals, that an employer shows up. Now, the employer showed up with by virtue of their legal representation, Chair. So, you know, they were, as they say back home, they were loaded for bear. They wanted to challenge this. They wanted to win this. And they were going to use whatever hammer was necessary to put down that worker. Now, one has to stop and think, well, where was this great objection to smoking in the workplace when they held public hearings at CBRM? I guess life isn't worth as much in Cape Breton as it is in HRM, but you know, you wonder where they're at. You wonder that they didn't bother showing up, you know, like with their big legal staff to fight the smoking bylaw in Cape Breton. No, you know, a quick review of testimony in front of the bylaw committee at that time, Mr. Chair, will show you that as opposed to representing themselves, there was a group of basically industry-related individuals that spoke on the draft bylaw, but that was it. They didn't bring in, you know, the big guns. But yet, when a worker had the temerity to question this government or this casino, to say, look, I received a layoff, and therefore I should be, I should have the right to have a layoff if I'm exposed to secondhand smoke, and they took them to the tribunal, and you know, I'm just wondering if the casino in its high-handedness now will take it to the next level, to the umpire level, to further harass this employer. And it knows that it will get the full support of this government, because this government has literally buckled at the knees when any indication would be that they may be moving on. So, you know, there's two examples, right? There's two examples of this government when it comes to representing workers that, you know, they certainly have no problem in abdicating or its responsibilities, Mr. Chair. But, you know, we see, like, many of our workers trying to struggle, Mr. Chair. They're struggling to make ends meet, whether it's RRSS, whether it's people, it's people in the fishery. It's interesting, that as we speak, our colleagues in the Newfoundland legislature could possibly be debating a bill or a resolution talking about amending our Constitution, because they don't feel that they're being dealt with adequately when it comes to resources. And that's a very interesting argument to get in, because, Mr. Chair, I know for years, I don't think there was a section of this province that really adequately got the recognition for the resources in its area that it's been used, whether it's the fishery, as they're fighting about in Newfoundland and Labrador, whether it's our forestry products, whether it's our minerals, and whether it's our offshore oil. We've got, speaker before me spoke about the closure of the industry and said it was the demise of the coal industry was because of the defeat of a member from Cape Breton, East Richmond at that time. Well, Mr. Speaker, I would put forward if an industry and literally thousands of families were put out of work because a government, got wrapped on its knuckles for not doing its job. I can't believe that the government of Canada is that small-minded, that the little guy from Shawinigan is really that small-minded, that he would cause that much devastation to that many families because one guy lost his seat. I would hope that the federal government has compassion. But according to the previous speaker, that's why the coal mine is closed, is because that a member of the federal Liberal cabinet lost his seat, and that's why Cape Breton is without its working coal mines. One would hope that's not true, but that's I'm going by with what the previous speaker had said, and I will put that to the record as he said it. Well, Mr. Chair, but let's talk about that resource and how what's left for Cape Breton after that resource has been taken away, because we're talking about what's in this financial measures that would help the resource-based industries. Well, for years, for some reason, the Department of Natural Resources don't, for whatever reason, don't use it as a high priority to get those coal leases back, so we could probably get working on something like the Donkin mine, which is basically ready for production, or could very shortly be put into production, but yet the provincial government sees no great need to ramp it up and bring those resources on stream. Instead, we've now gone through over 2 years of either negotiations or no negotiations or delay of negotiations, because nobody knows. They're not being held publicly. Nobody knows where the state of play is, if they've even signed one item off as it relates to the environmental impact to Cape Breton with the closure of the coal industry. So we don't know where it's at. We don't know whether we can expect tomorrow that there'll be an announcement made, or 10 years from tomorrow when an announcement will be made. We do know that there is people willing to look at mining that resource that would give us resource-based monies back into that area. It certainly wouldn't bring mining to its heyday, but certainly would go there. And I mean, we've already heard musings from the Minister of Economic Development of saying that there is literally hundreds and thousands of tons of strip mining coal, and I would contend that before anybody moves forward on any kind of reaction or action on strip mining coal in industrial Cape Breton, that this government should do no less than the highest level of environmental impact study that's possible, because, Mr. Speaker, we've seen the devastation of strip mining in areas of industrial Cape Breton, not the least of which is in my riding where Novaco, owned by Mr. Chisholm and Antigonish, mine coal and has basically scarred that landscape forever. I mean, it's never been returned to its former mining site. It's just, if you happen to fly into Sydney, sometimes you fly over that and you see where this was just gouged out of the earth, and there's settling ponds left there and remnants of buildings and so on, and it was nothing. It's certain things around strip mining that you would see, Mr. Speaker, that have to be done. There has to be agreements done with communities where these taking place, and the type of exploration they're going to use. Whether if they're blasting the coal, then I think they've got to put together such items as bonds that would be sitting before an impartial third party who could decide that money would be spent, because, you know, Mr. Chair, a large group of people that live around many of these areas that they're looking at strip mining are on surface wells and very shallow wells, other shallow wells, Mr. Chair, and any kind of disturbance of the strata below could cause wells to go dry and so forth. And what happens then is, if you're without a well, do you take it to court, and you're in court for months, if not years, and you're without proper use of facilities, or you have to upfront pay for those facilities and get them repaired through no fault of your own, and then take the responsible parties to court and try to win that back. So what I would say to you, Mr. Chair, is that, you know, government should be talking about those type of things, those resource-based issues, that there should be, if these people are, after a full environmental assessment, if they're allowed to go forward, one of the large caveats that have to be put on any explorations for these groups is that they have to be able to put money in the form of a bond and say that we cannot move forward, and that there's a recognized third party, an impartial third party, that will help move these forward and protect the residents of these areas from these type of carpetbagging type of operations, if you will, to go in and extricate the mineral and then leave us with just literally holding the bag. So those are items around one of the issues of resource-based management that, you know, the government fails to talk about in its budgetary process, and particularly how it relates to the Financial Measures Act. But, you know, the coal mining industry is you know, one that, as a matter of fact, when it's going to be severely impacted one way or the other when the full impact of Kyoto is realized, and how we're going to have to work within those confines. But yet, you know, we're left out there with a resource that's sitting there, and we're not doing anything with it. And, you know, I remember once being told by a minister that the reason we're not going to touch that resource until we get complete, and DevCo's not going to sell anything off until we get a complete study of what the environmental impact is going to. Nothing will be moved. Well, or nothing will be sold, I should say. But you know what? Since those statements have been made, DevCo has sold off its railway. It's selling off its portage and the international coal piers and the loading. And we've had problems with the environment with those. Matter of fact, I think the company that operates that have been charged by the Department of Environment. Yet that's been sold. And the other area that the coal wash or the coal preparation plant out of Victoria's Junction has been let go, and same with the rail transportation center. All areas that are probably have a greater possibility to be polluted than any of the mine sites. You have, for instance, at the Donkin site, basically a greenfield site with 2 tunnels bored underground. So there's no really great environmental impact study going to be held there. It just seems to be one that this government wants to say, look, we're going to hold you up to this for something, and I don't know what it is. I don't know what government is waiting so long to negotiate with the federal government over the handing over of the leases from the federal government. So one has to wonder, what's it all about? What are we doing? Why isn't things like that to protect the residents of industrial Cape Breton? Why isn't that talked about in the provincial government putting forward in budget what monies it's willing to invest in that, and therefore more greatly seen in the Financial Measures Act, excuse me, of how we're going to get that money and the timeline in which it's going to be paid and so on. So, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, there seems to be an act here that's more about what's not in it than what's in it, and that's what concerns me very much so, Mr. Chair, that we're dealing with a government that really talks about its $155 check or its proposed legislation around an income tax cut and stuff like that, but yet does nothing when you want to talk